Washington Journal continues.
Joining us this morning is Congressman Buddy Carter, Republican of Georgia. He's a member of the Budget Committee. Sir, how did you vote last night on the package to raise the debt ceiling and continue funding the government?
Well, I voted no. I've, along with 210 other of my colleagues, we voted against it.
And why?
Well, first of all, we need to decouple these two things. Obviously, what the speaker is trying to do is to get cute, if you will, and combine things that would entice one to vote for something, and then at the same time include the debt limit, which I'm not going to vote to extend the debt limit, because that will just give them the opportunity, them being the Democrats, the opportunity to pass the $3.5 trillion socialist wish list that they are proposing here.
When Republicans were in control and President Trump was the president, did you vote for the tax cuts?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act were, I think, one of the signature pieces of legislation that were passed by that Republican by the administration, by the Trump administration. And I think it was, a great economic stimulus, and it's been proven to be just that.
Did you vote for the CARES Act?
I voted for the CARES Act, yes. The first four bills, I guess you could say there were five, but nevertheless, the first bills I did vote for, yes.
You heard the speaker on the floor say, this is raising the debt ceiling is to pay for those two things that you voted for. How do you respond?
I think that's erroneous, and I think that's intentionally misleading on her part. Obviously, a pandemic is an extraordinary event that has happened that most of us and all of us have never experienced in our lifetime. And certainly it called for extraordinary measures. And we did just that when we passed the CARES Act. And I would submit that the CARES Act was good for our country. It provided the Paycheck Protection Program, which, saved hundreds of thousands of jobs in my district alone, and throughout the country saved millions of jobs. So it was something that was very much needed. That was just, of course, one part of it. And there were other parts that were certainly beneficial to all of us and beneficial to the citizens of this country.
So why is it erroneous then for the speaker to say we have to pay that bill now? We promised to spend that money and now we've got to pay it.
Well, I think it's erroneous because what her intention is to raise the debt limit so that we can, so that the Democrats can pass, as I said earlier, their $3.5 trillion socialist wish list, the progressive priorities that they are proposing. And that's the reason they're trying to increase the debt limit. Look, we've got to get spending under control in our country. I'm a father of three, a grandfather of 5 and soon to be 6. And what we're doing here is saddling future generations with debt that they're not going to be able to overcome. And we've got to get our house in order. This is intergenerational theft here. And what it's going to result in is going to be a lower quality of life for our children and our grandchildren. And that's just something that I'm not willing to do.
The Washington Post says a cap on the amount of debt the United States can incur. The debt limit does not authorize any new spending. It just allows the government to finance spending Congress has already approved. Because the federal revenue comes in waves and because the United States runs a deficit, the government can rely for only so long on its monthly income. The Treasury must issue bonds to cover the gap between what Congress has promised to pay and the government's means to pay it. Dealing with the debt limit is typically a bipartisan exercise, in part because failing to do so would be catastrophic. Your response?
Well, certainly, look, nobody wants to see a scenario where we default. I don't think that's the intent of Republicans or Democrats. But at the same time, we've proven time and time again that we cannot control spending. And I will go as far as to say that's true with Republicans and Democrats. And we need something extraordinary to make us become accountable, fiscally accountable. And perhaps this is it. But you can make the argument, well, you've already spent that money; it's already been authorized. Well, I didn't authorize the latest relief package. I didn't vote for that, and I wasn't in favor of it. There was so much pork in there that I voted against it. So we've got to get this under control, and it's going to take something extraordinary, as I say, to force us to get it under control.
Don in Salinas, California, Republican.
Hi. Yeah, I've got a few things to say here. The first is the sad, sorry excuses I'm hearing from the Democrats. Excuse number one, but Trump did it. Really? You went to Harvard? You went to Yale to make an excuse like a child who says that my brother did it, I want to do it too. That really blows my mind. And then the saddest excuse is to get in front of the camera and say, hey, we are so bad at managing the money that we're going to go into default unless we raise the debt limit, and the default will hurt you. And I'm not sorry for it one bit. You guys are going to have to raise the debt limit or you're going to hurt, not me. I'm going to keep getting my check. I can't believe this stuff coming out of Washington, D.C. nowadays. You know something? I live in California. I'm paying $5 a gallon for gas. I'm paying big-time taxes on everything. I'm paying more for my electricity than anybody else in the country. And then the government says it wants more of my money, like I owe them. You guys have become a sad. I don't even know what to call you, a caricature of a government over there in Washington, D.C.
All right, let's get a response. Congressman.
Well, I think these are valid points that are being made here by the caller. You talk about the price of gas. You talk about the fact that inflation has run rampant. And, the Democrats will argue, well, it's transitory. As soon as we get the supply chain worked out, it'll go away. I don't believe that for 1 minute. I don't think the caller believes that for 1 minute. Talk about the price of gas that's gone up 47%. And what is this $3.5 trillion package going to do, the socialist wish list? What is it going to do? It's going to build more inflation. It's going to cause more inflation. And inflation is nothing more than a tax. Inflation is nothing more than a pay cut for people. And that's what we have to keep in mind. And that's what this $3.5 trillion socialist wish list is going to do. Make no mistake about it. What is going on in Washington, D.C. right now is all tied in to what the Democrats are trying to do with this $3.5 trillion socialist wish list. We could resolve all of these problems that we've gotten at right now with the debt limit. We could resolve the infrastructure. We could pass this $1.1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill, although I do have some serious concerns about it. Nevertheless, we could get that done if the Democrats would simply do away with this $3.5 trillion monstrosity that they are proposing. And oh, by the way, it's really not 3.5 trillion, it's really 5.5 trillion. And if you look at it, this is Bernie Sanders's proposal that calls for spending $68 trillion over the next 10 years, that calls for adding $17 trillion to our national debt. That's already around $28 trillion. This is simply ridiculous.
Let's hear from Ronnie in San Jose, California, independent. Ronnie, you with us in San Jose, California? One last call for Ronnie. Okay, I'm moving on to Mike in Long Beach, California, Democratic caller.
Yes, hello. Actually, I'm an independent. How I see it, I'm just looking at everything historically. And this debt started back during the Ronald Reagan administration in this belief of a trickle-down theory that by cutting taxes for the higher income people, you would get an extraordinary growth. We did get a good growth during his years, but that's quite a bit to do with the baby boom generation getting into their peak spending years. Bill Clinton balanced that budget, but in January 2001, we did have a balanced budget, but because of the trickle-down tax breaks that George W. Bush put into place in 2001 and 2003, which created the annual deficit that we see today. Add in Trump's tax breaks, and we have the debt you see that we're arguing about today. We're not bankrupt. It's time to start raising the taxes, and somebody's got to pay.
All right, let's take that argument. Congressman.
Look, what we've got is a spending problem. What we need to do is to cut up the credit cards here in Washington, D.C. It's been proven time and time again that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and anytime you cut taxes, that it does stimulate the economy. I would much rather give the citizens of this country the opportunity to choose where they want to spend their money, as opposed to sending it to the government and letting them decide where to spend it. That has been proven not to work time and time again. The tax cuts that were put in place with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it did stimulate our economy. You mentioned yourself that during the Reagan years, that the tax cuts, the trickle-down effect, it did have a positive influence on our economy. And that's what we need to do. But we need to keep in mind, the problem in Washington, D.C. is a spending problem. Until we get control of our spending in Congress, both among Democrats and Republicans, we're always going to have this problem.
Laura in Spokane, Washington, Republican.
Yes. Good morning. It's a pleasure to talk to you this morning. My concern is this: the amount of the government gathers $3.46 trillion every year in taxes. And I want to know why that isn't enough. That's a lot of money. And yet here we have this big, huge bill that basically does nothing for our country. It does something for somebody's agenda, but it does nothing for our country or the American people. When President Trump went in, he got the money he needed to build up our military, and people could stay in business, because those taxes didn't just go to the rich. They went straight to the employees. And that helped families. It helped businesses. They could buy business equipment, get new employees, and everything that was going really well. But now to add this $3.5 trillion and another $1.5 trillion and all this other stuff, it's just, I don't believe we have the right kind of people in there that can handle that kind of money responsibly.
All right, Laura. Congressman.
I think she's hit the nail on the head. I think this young lady is absolutely correct. It doesn't matter if it's $3.76 trillion or $1 trillion. If you can't appropriate or if you can't control what you spend, it doesn't matter how much you're going to bring in. What we've got, again, is a spending problem. If you're going to bring in $3.76 trillion, then you need to spend $3.76 trillion. If you're going to bring in $1 trillion, then you need to only spend $1 trillion. The problem is with the spending. And how did they do it in Washington, D.C.? How do we do it up here? We say, oh, these are the programs that we want, and this is how much it's going to cost. We're going to spend that much money. Well, we're only bringing in $3.76 trillion, but what we wanted was $5 trillion, so we're just going to go in debt. That's not going to work. Sooner or later, it catches up with you, and now it's catching up with us. Until we can be fiscally responsible and only spend what we bring in, then that's when we're going to get things under control. Look, I was a small businessman for over 32 years. You think that I could have revenues of $1 million and go out and spend $2 million? No, I could never do that. If I had revenues of $1 million, I was going to have to do one of two things. I was either going to have to figure out how I was going to increase my revenues, or I was going to have to cut my expenses to be appropriate with that $1 million. And that's what we need to be doing in Washington, D.C.
Leroy in Braddock, Pennsylvania, Democratic caller.
Yes, I basically want to say that it just seems like when the Republicans get in office, they do what they want to do, and there's nobody to stop them. You know, they run roughshod over top of the Democrats and do whatever they want to do. Now, when Trump got in office, he let the rich people bring all of those hidden taxes that they had offshore come flooding back in for literally nothing that Obama was trying to stop. So they got that. and you might as well say almost tax-free. And then Trump turns around and gives a tax cut for the rich on top of that. I mean, and it's just, we always got money for this country or that country or this country, and it's the working people here that they're taking the money from, but they feel like they have a problem, sharing the money and spreading the money around to help people that's here.
Let's get a response. Congressman.
Well, I can understand the gentleman's frustration, and certainly it's frustrating to me too. And the President Trump had a policy of America first, and certainly that meant that we were going to make sure that we were taking care of our own. It's important for us to take care and to help and be humanitarian in other countries. I get that. We all get that. But we can't take our eye off of what's going on here in America as well. And, look, we all want everybody to pay their fair share, whether you're rich, poor, or middle class. You want everyone to pay their fair share. And I think that's incumbent upon us as lawmakers and as members of Congress and the legislature to make sure that that is indeed happening. And certainly I'm committed to trying to do that and have been since I've been up here.
Under the tax cuts passed by Republicans and President Trump, did you make sure that the wealthy were paying their fair share in corporations?
That seems to be the Democrats' rally cry right now. It seems to be Joe Biden's rally cry, fair share. Well, what is fair share? I mean, let's face it, this war on rich people and on those who have been successful in capitalism. And look, I've been both. I've been poor and now I'm comfortable. I'm certainly not wealthy, but I am comfortable. And I will tell you that it is frustrating for people to pay in and see all this waste. And I'm constantly reminding myself of that whenever I'm up here and whenever I'm voting on a bill. I try to think of it in terms of, well, wait a minute, what about the guy like my dad who worked in a paper mill, who worked shift work in a paper mill and worked for an hourly wage? What's that person, what are they thinking about this? And how is this going to impact them? And is it going to help them? But I also want to think about those people who are stimulating our economy and who are investing in our economy. How is it going to affect them if they're going to be creating jobs? So that, there is a fine line here. But I tell you, I'm growing weary of this fair share argument that Joe Biden has been making all the time. It's wearing thin, I will tell you that.
John in Connolly Springs, North Carolina, Republican.
Yes, thanks. I just can't believe what's going on up there in Washington. I'm almost 78 years old. Me and my wife live on $1,800 a month, and everything going up. I know when Trump was in, gas was less than $2 a gallon, and now it's over $3 here. All of our food's going up, and they just spend like that. I don't understand it. I mean, I know they're all rich. It ain't gonna bother them, but people like me, that's who it's hitting hard. And I just wish they could do something, and I hope they don't raise the death limit. Stay in there and don't let people intimidate you. Thanks.
Congressman?
What a great call. And this is exactly what we were talking about inflation. I mean, here's someone on a fixed income, $1,800 a month, trying to make ends meet, and yet now gas is going up, now food is going up, the staples that we have to have, they're going up. Inflation is a tax. It's a tax on everyone. It's a pay cut. That's what we have to keep in mind. This $3.5 trillion socialist wish list is build more inflation. That's what we refer to it as, the Build More Inflation Act. And that's what it's going to do. It's going to hurt people, just like the caller that we just heard from. That's the people it's going to hurt the most. When we talk about inflation, who does it hurt the most? It hurts the most those low income and low income people. That's who it hurts the most, because they are the ones who can least afford it. That's what we have to keep in mind. And this this monstrosity of a bill, this $3.5 trillion socialist wish list, is going to do nothing more than increase inflation.
Joel in Michigan, Democratic caller, you're on with Congressman Buddy Carter. Go ahead.
Hi. Well, first of all, I'm going to say this, that when Trump got into office, price of gas was $2.28 a gallon. It got up to $2.89 a gallon during his administration, and nobody cares about that. The price of gas rate, under Biden is about the same increase as what it was under Trump. In 2018, I was paying $2.89 a gallon, and when Trump got in, it was $2.29. Now, as far as this tax rebate that you were talking about, I would advise you to go and look up the ITEP reports, where ITEP says that $1.7 trillion was actually a CEO stock buyback program, and that's what ITEP reported. And ITEP has reported that there are companies like Chevron and Halliburton who pay no taxes, make millions of dollars, and receive millions of dollars in tax rebates. It's not for the poor people. It's a Republican corporate welfare system where the rich get the richer.
Well, Congressman, we'll have the congressman respond.
Well, first of all, out of all due respect, I have to disagree that tax cuts do work, and they do help. They do help lower income people and middle income people, because you have more money to spend. Inflation, again, is nothing more than a tax, and it hurts people, particularly those people on fixed incomes. But if we can get more money into the economy through tax cuts, then there's more money for people to spend, and that just has a beneficial effect on the whole system. And that's what was accomplished through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That's what was accomplished during the Trump administration, and that's why our economy was humming. Now we get Joe Biden in office, and what has happened? All of a sudden, we got inflation going through the roof. We've got gas going up. We've got food going up. All of those things that we have to have are going up in price. And now we find that the money that we have doesn't go as far as it did before. And that is a problem.
Morton in Vienna, Virginia, Independent.
Good morning to all. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, the device that the congressman is using with regards to a business balance sheet and that he cannot spend more than he brings in revenue, that's a ludicrous device if you're trying to apply this to the federal budget. A business cannot spend money into existence. A family sitting at the kitchen table with a checkbook and a stack of credit cards cannot spend new money into existence. The taxes are not needed to fund government revenues. Let me say that one more time. Taxes for government revenue and expenditure are not needed. The government spends new money into existence. It then recovers some of that money in the form of taxes to hold down inflation. So you need to turn things upside down and kind of look at it in a different direction. It's called modern monetary theory. It's pretty well tested. And thank you very much.
Congressman.
Well, that's certainly an interesting perspective. I apologize, but I'm not sure. I'd have to study that more before I could really comment on it. I do think that we need more business people in Washington, D.C., and more business, more business thinking minds that. People like myself who've signed the front of a paycheck, who understand what it's like to sweat, to make sure that you got enough money in your checking account to cover those people who are depending on you, who are working with you and working for you. And that's the kind of what I think the kind of business model that we need to be using here in Washington, D.C. as well, as far as generating money and just printing more money. I think that's irresponsible.
Vivian in Tennessee, Democratic caller.
Good morning. Why don't you Republicans eliminate the death limits. We are the only country that do that. You all let Trump, when you all was in there, I watch you all every day. You did this to this country. Biden came in with this stuff left over. You know what? I'm sick and tired of you Republicans getting out there saying, all of you said the same talking points. It's about time the Democrats get out there and call you all out. During the pandemic, Trump was the president. People died because of him. You all didn't say anything. You didn't hold this man responsible. You sitting up here, the lobbyists are paying you all. We all see that now. You, especially in Georgia, when you up there don't want folks to vote, get people water, people starving, getting thrown out, home, old people can't afford medicine. How can you sit up there with a straight face and say this to America?
All right, Vivian, there are a lot of issues there. So is there one question for the congressman?
Yes. Why are you all doing this to us? The debt limit needs to be eliminated. We are the only country that do that, sir.
Okay. Congressman?
Why are we doing this? Why are we trying to be fiscally responsible? Because of my children, because of my grandchildren, and my grandchildren's children. If we continue on the track that we are on, I'm telling you, this country, the quality of life in this country is going to diminish and diminish significantly. This is intergenerational theft, what we are doing here, saddling our future generations with this much debt. This is unacceptable and irresponsible on our part. We can't, every generation wants the next generation to have it better. This may be the first time that we don't see that happen. I know I had it better than my dad's generation. My dad had it better than his dad's generation. But I'm not sure that my children, and I'm certainly not sure that my grandchildren are going to have it as good as I've had it. So that's the reason why. That's the reason why it's going to take some tough choices, some tough decisions to be made to get our fiscal house in order. And we've got to do that. That's a responsibility that we've been charged with, responsibility that we take very seriously, and that we're going to make sure that we do.
Congressman Buddy Carter, always appreciate the conversation with you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.